Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery. You were probably guessing that that glove was going to start moving on its own. Well, don't be silly. It doesn't even have my hand in it yet. So down here in my wormery, I got trays like this. Trays that I run worm composting systems in. This worm composting system uses one of the popular types of composting worms, the European nightcrawler. And the system was put into place 52 days ago. Over that time, it's received 5 feedings. The bin was built with no food, so the worms lived in this thing for a week before they received their first feeding. And then I decided to do something a little interesting in this bin with the feedings, and you might already be sensing which bin this is if you've seen my channel before. Normally we indicate where we last fed using a coffee filter like what you see over here, but it's not in the typical spot, because my typical spot's usually down the middle for serving up the food. But in this bin we decided to try something a little different. So we changed up the feeding pattern to be one that changes regularly on each occasion. So the marker shows us where we last fed. What was last fed there in the corner was avocado. A couple whole avocados were placed in there 10 days ago. And I've been keeping pretty good to a 10-day interval at this point on my feedings in this container. So the same way this feeding over here was placed into the corner, every feeding of this bin has been placed into a corner and changing on each occasion. So I've been going in this clockwise rotation. So going counterclockwise would take us back to the last feeding that came prior to the avocados, which was feeding number 4, apple peels, and then going back again, I was keeping to the 10-day interval pretty good now so far. And back here we had some veggies, mainly carrots. And I think even last time we looked in here and didn't see any leftovers, that's for sure. But there's something in this corner that has a pretty good size leftover. On this occasion now we're only going back 8 days. There was an 8-day interval back here between these two feedings. Here we've got the stem of a pumpkin, but that leaves us back to the first initial feeding of this system, which happened over here, which was the perhaps not so unusual but uncommon in my feedings, which was some leftover mashed potatoes, which even as of last week, after 6 weeks, not 6 weeks, but 5 weeks being in there, those mashed potatoes were still showing some signs of leftovers. So don't be so amazed at my ability to recall all this information. I did create a little diagram. So you could just glance over it really quick and see if I was correct in the way that I presented the information. I think I was. Basically it reads like this. You go, bin was built, sat as a bedding only bin for 7 days before the first feeding, and then feeding number 1 of mashed potatoes was in there for 7 days. We got to revisit it 7 days later to see how it did, but then in went feeding number 2, the pumpkin stem, which also included some pumpkin bits, some Brussels sprouts. That sat for the 8 days, and then we got into the 10-day intervals. But the third feeding 8 days later was the veggies, primarily carrots. 10 days later came the apple peels. I don't know, did I mention the apple peels? I might have skipped it before, so I'm glad I got the diagram here to keep us honest, right? And then that led us to the last feeding of the 2 avocados placed in here, which were placed in here in such a way that they were the avocado cut in half, but stuck together and frozen together. So both of those avocados might not have even been breached yet by the worms that live in this container. So I'm curious to see what happens in here. I'm also curious if we see any leftover mashed potato. So I could see some worms that were out here in the material that we removed from the top surface. The one thing I like about this container is just the moisture level seems just right. I don't recall ever even needing to add any moisture to this system as long as I've had it running over the past 52 days. But it always feels just right, you know. And these avocados do seem like they're attracting the worms to a certain point. You might already be able to see where the seam is, or the cut, where these were cut in half. And I guess the big mystery last time we were in here was, oh, look at that. I never have a lot of luck with the avocados, but that was the curious thing. We didn't know if this was going to have the pit in here or not. I couldn't remember, since they were frozen shut last time we came in here. We didn't get to see. But it looks like the avocado must exude some really yummy juices or something, because right beneath the avocado was a good number of worms hanging out, as well as the worms that were right there within the avocado too. Good number of worms down there. I wonder how this other one's doing. Let's check it out really quick and then we can... Yep, same story down there. Once again, no pit, but not quite as many worms taking interest here. That's okay. I did have kind of unusual luck so far with these avocados. These avocados, I had a number of them, all from the same batch. All had something with them. I don't know. They just whatever. The point is, I had a whole bunch of the avocados from the same batch, and in my past attempts at composting them, it seemed to me like they just didn't really go over that well in the worm bins. So to see one of them, which is the one over here, do so well already is more like what I'm used to seeing in other people's videos, because in other people's videos the avocados always do really well. Alright, so that was last feeding. If we were to go forwards into the clockwise direction, we'd get to the place where we're going to feed today. But let's go back instead. I want to go back 20 days to see how apple peels are progressing. They were getting pretty popular last time, but I always expect apple peels to go a little bit more slowly in my systems. But I think the main thing that they were attracted to last time we came in here was the moisture starting to come off this stuff. I still believe that the apple itself is something that, for whatever reason, takes a while for the worms to be able to break it down. So whether they're coming for the moisture or they're coming for the decomposing fruits and veggies, doesn't matter. The important thing is that they're there and they're working it, and that the moisture level's really good. Plenty of moisture in here too. I think that's pretty much what we're going to see on each occasion. You noticed how I had this thing covered up. It has a plastic bag draped over the entire top, holding the moisture in quite nicely. And I don't know, a lot of people criticize that it doesn't allow for airflow, but I am careful. I do check in pretty regularly. And somehow I don't sense that there's ever really been an issue. So in here, we had already last time said that it was clear that there were virtually no leftovers remaining, but there's still worms hanging out here. There's a good amount of moisture down here. I guess they're still working down whatever leftovers there were, or maybe they're just enjoying the moisture all over that bedding in there. Yeah, the important thing is that they're there and that they're working the material. Looks really nice there too. But it'll be interesting to get something in that corner, because that corner's been wiped out of the veggies and carrots that were put in there pretty quick, soon after it was applied. So now we're back to the corner where today's feeding's going, and here, if you remember the diagram, this is where the pumpkin stem is. And this is kind of why I left it for last. Not really, because this is where we're feeding, but just a coincidence. The pumpkin stem is a novel item, and after being in here now, how long has it been? 10 days back to the avocado, 20 days back to the apple, 30 days, 38 days. This thing's been in here for 38 days now. I could definitely see worms down there within the inside of this thing. Well, it doesn't look like they're able to penetrate it from this side, because it is still pretty tough. This side of it is a little bit more weathered. And even as I squeeze it, I could sense that the insides of this thing are starting to deteriorate. They really like getting into those little grooves. There wasn't a whole lot of anything else left in here after all that time. There were some Brussels sprouts, I think, placed in here too, but that's another one of those things that wouldn't last very long in a worm bin. So what they're getting today, I haven't even introduced it yet, but let's take a look here. I've got a bag of, believe it or not, still stuff from my garden. It's January now. And when the first frost came, I took down everything that was on the plants outside. Every tomato, every pepper, and even pretty recently we were still trying to move along some of my tomatoes that had been set aside from my garden, but I haven't made much reference to the peppers. These are just a variety of different, probably some jalapenos, some of these Hungarian peppers, spicy ones. seeds and all. For whatever reason, I think maybe because of the high prevalence of seeds usually in peppers, I just seem to want to always send the peppers out into my outdoor compost barrel, thinking that I don't want to have vermicompost that's riddled with seeds that are going to start sprouting every time you go to use the compost. But you know, I mean, everything I'm putting in here almost has some sort of seeds scattered within it. Certain seeds are more prone to germinating and popping out as little sprouts in your potting soils. So I don't know, it's like, it's the one thing I wonder a lot about, like these people that you see selling their compost, but you can see that they're using materials that are just buckets of who knows what, probably full of seeds. Do they do some sort of a process that prevents their vermicompost that they're selling from, you know, germinating and sprouting alongside whatever it is that's being intentionally grown in this stuff? I don't know. Or is there just some sort of a disclaimer that says, hey, you're using naturally produced vermicompost, could have some seeds in it, be warned. Alright, you might have noticed I also had coffee. I don't think I've been using a lot of coffee in this system, but I've got coffee piling up upstairs. So I'm going to include some in today's feeding. We'll just sort of include it in here alongside all this stuff. And you know what? We've been using a coffee filter to indicate to ourselves where we last fed. We'll use this old one that's been floating around doing that job for a while now. And we'll take the nice new one that we just bought down here and that we're emptying the coffee out of. That'll take over now as the new feeding zone indicator. The old one now gets to actually get down into the action where all the fun is. All right, let's put a little bit more of the coffee right there onto the coffee filter. And then I think in can go yet another little piece of soiled paper. It's so easy and convenient just to reach into my little basket of pre-made bedding here, but I do also like to try to get rid of soiled napkins, you know, coffee filters, whatever is around. And I guess the other nice thing about using kind of fresh, unoccupied bedding underneath a feeding like this, which is going in completely frozen, is that you're not going to put a bunch of frozen stuff right on top of a bunch of poor little worms right beneath. So I'm sure they appreciate that. Once that stuff starts to thaw, they'll be in there, and I'm almost certain of it that they're going to love it. Because anytime I do see worms on pepper, it seems like they're really enjoying it. But like I said, I tend to avoid it. I usually send it into my outdoor compost. Just because to me it always seems like it's mainly seeds. In this case, it's not mainly seeds. It's a bunch of, you know, stuff that I tried to preserve from my garden after the season had pretty much ended, but right before the first frost, and some of it just never really made it onto the dinner table. See, this material that we pulled out of here to make our hole is pretty much littered with worms. I think that the estimate I went in here with was like 1,500 or something. In the past, I'd always sort of polled my audience to ask them what they thought they saw when we did worm releases and worm collections, and tried to estimate what sort of size populations we've had in our systems. So a lot of my numbers are kind of weird, you know, 2934 or something like that. 2,900 something is the estimate of how many worms are in my my outdoor worm bag, which is really not even an outdoor bag anymore. I bought it in for fear of it freezing. But yeah, here it was just a thumbnail guess, 1,500. I believe that was probably the same thing when I released the other European night crawlers into the buckets that I'm running them in. I there too just used some sort of a rough guess, didn't really poll the audience for what they thought they saw as far as numbers. But you know, we're kind of preserving things just the way they were when we got in here. All these worms hanging out on this piece of paper. Well, that's the reason I folded it over, you know. Let them stay in darkness, stay in dampness, and we'll just get them back to where they were before we disturb them. Alright, not much left to do here other than restore the coverings. Here's another little guy that was stranded out on the plastic covering. But yeah, this plastic covering does a really nice job keeping the moisture in. I'm very pleased with the way it works. A lot of people suggest that it could severely restrict airflow. I don't know, after a fairly thorough tilling up of the material, aeration, not to mention, you know, pretty regular check-ins at this point, pretty consistently 10 days on average. The system, I think, has a pretty good aerated consistency to it, so I don't think the worms are suffering in terms of oxygen content, but that's about it. I think I've got only a little bit of cleaning up and putting away to do, but I'm not going to keep you around for that because that's boring. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.